So, my dear brothers and sisters, welcome back again for this third talk in the series. And in the last two talks, if you have followed them closely, we are trying to understand that God is the source of life. And since He is the creator and He created us, it becomes mandatory for us to seek His purpose, to seek His plan for us. Because the plan that He has for us, as we read in yesterday in the passage Jeremiah 29:11, that He has a plan for each and every one of us. And His plan for us is for our good, to give us a life full of hope. So therefore, yesterday we saw that how doing God's will is so important. Now, as Christians, we are not here to do just good. And yesterday we saw that also, that we are not here to just do good. We are here to do God's will. And there is a difference between just doing good and doing God's will. So therefore, in this talk I want to emphasize that it becomes so important as we Christians to constantly discern God's will. In fact, we all need, as Christians, to imitate very two wonderful personalities that we have in Bible as to how we need to live. And these two wonderful personalities are, one is Mother Mary herself and her son Jesus. Let us very quickly see how did they live, or what was the driving force that made them the persons that they are right now. Mother Mary is revered and venerated as the Mother of God, and we have Jesus. So therefore, now let's just see how did these two live. Can you just read Luke chapter 1 verse 38?
Then Mary said, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord.
Mary says, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord." Handmaid means servant. And then she says,
Let it be done to me according to your word."
"Not according to my will." As a young girl, maybe she didn't want this entire thing to happen, where she would become pregnant and then the Jews would kind of tell her that you're not married, how come you're pregnant? And then she would undergo all the trials and finally be stoned to death. She was hesitant, but finally she said, "Not my will. Let it be done to me according to your words," God's words, which means Mother Mary, for Mother Mary, whom we all have such respect and devotion for, she also in her life strived to do God's will, not my will. No matter how difficult it may seem, but let it be done to me according to your words. And let's see her son Jesus, how Jesus lived. Very quickly, we shall see the life of Jesus in detail, but in today's topic, let's quickly see how Jesus lived. We see John chapter 4 and verse 34. What Jesus says, what is the strength? Where do He get the strength? What is His bread? Yeah.
Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of the one who sent me."
Jesus says, my food. Food is the source of energy. Food is the source of life. And Jesus says, from where do I receive the strength? He says, my food is to do the will of my Father. Which means the entire purpose of Jesus' life, the source of Jesus' purpose is to do the will of the Father. Again in John chapter 6 verse 38, see what Jesus says.
"For I have descended from heaven not to do my own will."
I have descended from heaven. I have come down from heaven. Why?
"Not to do my own will, but the will of Him who sent me."
Jesus says, I have come into this world not to do my will, but I am here to do the will of my Father. Now, if Mother Mary says that, "Let it be done to me according to your words," which means let everything happen according to God's plan. And if the Son also is saying that I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but the will of my Father who sends me, that means so important, that for them it was so important. So therefore, Mother Mary also, as a young girl, she is trying to do the will of the Father. And her son Jesus also, he says that my entire purpose to come down into this world is not to do my will, but the will of my Father who has sent me. Now, as Christians, Is it not that we all want to be brothers and sisters and mothers of Jesus? We all desire to do that, no? Jesus, you are my brother, and you are my Lord, and all that. Now, how can we qualify to be closely associated and related with Jesus? How do we qualify? Because many claim that, yes, Jesus is my brother. Fine, good, very good. But just because you say and you wish, you don't become brother of Jesus. There is a condition which Jesus says. What are the conditions so that we can become part of Jesus's closely associated, part of his family? And Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 12 and verse 50. Who qualifies to be the mother and the brother and sister of Jesus?
For anyone who does the will of my Father.
For anyone who does the will of my Father, not one's own will, the will of the Father,
Who is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother.
So therefore, Jesus would say, who's my brother, who's my sister and my mother? The one who does the will of my Father. So, therefore, to do the will of the Father is so important. And now, we go a little further. How do we know the will of the Father in our lives? We all have to make so many decisions. We have to make choices in our life. How do we know the will of the Father? And many ask me this question, Father, how to discern God's will? Okay, there are various ways, there are various processes, but of a very simple way to know God's will is the Holy Bible. Read the Bible. What does Bible contain? Bible contains the will of the Father. For example, there is a situation, you get angry and you want to know, is getting angry good? What is the will of the Father with regard to anger? Open Matthew chapter 5 and Jesus would say, do not be angry. It was said, do not murder, but I tell you, even those who get angry, which means Jesus says, you are not supposed to get angry. Suppose you want to know, Father, we don't commit adultery. No, we don't actually have that relationship. But suppose we look lustfully, or we kind of find someone attractive, we look at, is that anything wrong with it? What is Father's will? Open the gospel and Jesus says, even those who look lustfully at another person has committed adultery, which means as a Christian, the Father's will for us is that we are not even expected to look lustfully, have those thoughts of lust in our minds and our hearts. So therefore in Bible, we have the will of Father in the Bible. Now, coming back to yesterday's talk. Yesterday we saw that the will of the Father is manifested in Bible through commandments and laws. And in Bible there are 613, more than 613 do's and don'ts, which we call laws and commandments. And yesterday we saw the first one. And we saw that commandment in Mark chapter 12 and verse 28. That we shall love our God with all our hearts, with all our soul, with all our mind, and with all our strength. That is the first commandment. And yesterday we tried to understand that to love God with all our hearts, with all our soul, with all our mind and all our strength means to have God as our priority in our life. To have God in the first position in our life. That's what we saw yesterday. Now, again, I gave you a couple of examples that why we need to have God as our first priority. He's the source of life. Now, immediately after this commandment is love for neighbors. The first is love God, and immediately what proceeds is, can you just read, Leo, both the commandments, one after another. And these two are the greatest of the commandments. Yeah. Mark chapter 12 verse 28.
And one of the scribes who had heard them arguing drew near to him, and seeing that he had answered them well, he questioned him as to which was the first commandment of all.
So the scribe is asking Jesus, which is the first, which is the greatest commandment of all? And Jesus is answering him.
And Jesus answered him, for the first commandment of all is this, listen, O Israel.
Listen, O Israel, which means instead of Israel, just put your name. Listen. And what is the commandment?
The Lord your God is one God. And you shall love the Lord your God from your whole heart, and from your whole soul, and from your whole mind, and from your whole strength.
And this simply means that we need to have God as our first priority. This is the first commandment, that we need to first love God. That's our first priority. And then the second commandment follows.
But the second is similar to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself.
This is the second commandment. And then Jesus would go on to say,
There is no other commandment greater than these.
that means to say that even if we are not sure about the other 611 commandments, no problem. You try to follow these first two commandments. And once we try to live these first two commandments, automatically we'll be able to follow the other 611 commandments. So the first commandment is to love God. And then second commandment is to love one another as ourselves. Now, there are many who say, and we all know that, we've been told, love. You must love. You must love your neighbors. You must love your neighbors. Is it easy? Is it easy? It's not easy. It's not easy. We all have read that, you shall love. When you go for counseling, there's some problems and issues. And some priest or minister say, no, you must love. You must forgive. You must love. You must pray for them. And you must. Is it easy? It is so difficult to love. Yes, exactly. It's so difficult to love. For the simple reason that who is the source of love? Where do we get love from? And today I want to just focus and highlight upon this aspect, that how can we follow the second commandment? That is, love your neighbors as yourself. It is only when we have the first commandment followed, when we have loved God, only then we will be able to follow the second commandment. Without the first commandment, we will not be able to follow the second commandment. Now, let's all understand this very, very carefully. In the book of Genesis, there are two creation stories. Okay? Second chapter, the second creation story is something like this. God doesn't make Adam and Eve together. He first makes Adam. Okay? Now, it's not a question of argument that why man first and why not woman first. It's written and we take it. We accept it. That God made Adam first. Now, God being all-knowing and all-powerful, He should know that it is not good for man to be alone. He should know that. And He could have made both of them together. Now, this is according to the second creation story. But what God does is, He first creates the man. You know why He creates the man first? Because God didn't want man to see anybody else before man could fall in love with God Himself. So when Adam was created, there was nobody else. There was no human beings around. But it was only God. So man had no option but to fall in love with God. And when man's heart, Adam's heart, was filled with God's love, then God says, now you go to sleep. He's made to go to sleep. And God created Eve out of him. So therefore, when Eve is also created, what has happened to that man? He's sleeping. Why? Why? Because God doesn't want Eve to see the man first. So Eve also, when she's alive, she encounters God and she has no option but to fall in love with God. So now Eve's heart is also filled with God's love. Now, Adam's heart is filled with God's love. Eve's heart is filled with God's love. Now God says, now come on, both of you get up. Now, you man, your heart is filled with my love. Eve, your heart is filled with my love. Now, share that love with one another. Because without my love, you wouldn't have a good married life at all. How would you love one another without my love? So therefore, first God pours His love into their heart and then says, now you share your love with one another. So therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, it is so mandatory that if we want to follow the second commandment, the love commandment, we'll only be able to follow the second commandment, love commandment, if we have the first commandment been followed. That is, if we have given God the first priority in our life, if we have loved God enough. Now, many ask me this question, Father, what is Christian God like? What is our God like? That is, what is His nature form? Because in other religions, we have God. I'm talking of God the Father, not God the Son. Jesus, we know how He looked like, because Jesus is a historical figure. But many do not know what God the Father is like. So they ask me, Father, what is our God like? Now, we do not know his physical appearance because God is spirit. Okay? But we know what is his nature and his character. And we read the nature and character of God in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 8. What is our God like? What is his nature? What is his character? What is the stuff that is made up of? So in 1 John, first letter of John chapter 4 and verse 8, we read something like this.
Whoever does not love does not know God.
Whoever does not love does not know God. Why?
For God is love.
Now, God is equal to love. Which means to say, our God is nothing but love. Once again, let's read verse 16. Same chapter.
And as we have known and believed the love that God has for us, God is love.
God is love. Again, God is love. The meaning is this. Suppose I say my cassock is made up of cotton. Okay? Which means every thread of my cassock is made up of cotton. If you remove the cotton out of my cassock, what will remain? Nothing. Obviously, because every part of my cassock is made up of cotton. So, if you remove cotton, nothing remains. Now, you've seen sugar. Sugar is made of sweetness, no? Okay, every atom of sugar, every molecule of sugar is made of sweetness. Suppose you remove sweetness out of sugar, what will remain? Nothing. In that same way, the stuff that God is made up of is love. And therefore, if you take away love from God, what will remain? Nothing. Because God's nature is love. God is love. So therefore, Christian God is equal to love. Therefore, when I give him the first priority, when I love him, then his love is poured into my heart. And when I have his love, and what is love? Love is equal to God. So therefore, I am filled with whom? God. So therefore, now I have become like God. So that is what Christian spirituality is all about. When I am filled with God's love, I also have this nature of God. And only then I can love the way God has loved me. Without that, it's not possible. You know, I'll tell you something. Our human body is only capable of generating lust and desires. Our heart and all is not created, at least not after the fall. We saw the fall yesterday, not after the fall. So our body, we make determination and resolution. Yes, I want to love you. I want to love you, because many of them have told me that, as husband and wife, I have to love you. Is it possible? Are you able to? No. The simple reason is that our hearts are not filled with God's love. But when we have given God the first priority in our life, then our hearts are filled with God's love. Then we become God-like, and then we are able to give that love to others. Love can only be shared. We can only share love. We cannot produce love, because only God is love. So now when we have followed the first commandment, now the second commandment, love one another. And Leo, can you just read the second commandment, Gospel of Mark chapter 12, the second commandment. What is the second commandment?
But the second is similar to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself.
The second commandment is this. And again, I once again remind you, what are we reading? We are reading God's will. Many are trying to discern. What is God's will, Father? How to discern God's will? This is God's will. That we have to love one another. Now, mind you, the commandment is not this, that you love one another, full stop. No. If the commandment was something like this, that you love one another, then we would say, yes, Father, you have said to love one another. Okay, now how much to love, that I'll decide. So you're from Goa. I love Goa, so I love you more. You're from Tamil Nadu. Okay, I like Tamil Nadu, but not as much as Goa, so I love you a little less than Goa, but I love you. You're from Gujarat. Wow, you're Gujarat. Wow. You're from my mother state, so I love you more. I love you more. And you're from South. Okay, South, Idli Sambar, and okay, so South little less. But I love you, but not as much as I love Gujarat and Goa. I would decide that, no? If the commandment was just love one another, it's not that. It's love one another as much as you love yourself. Okay? Now, when we are filled with God's love, okay, who dwells in us? God. Okay? So now, the way God would love me, now I have to love everyone with that measure, as much as I love myself. And to love everybody as much as myself will only be possible when I have loved God, when God has poured His love into my heart and I am filled with God's love. Without that, it's not possible. And that's the reason why there are marriage problems and disputes in families, because they are only, in a human way, they are trying to live a family life. But it's all compromise and, fights and quarrels and arguments. There's no joy. Why? There's no joy because there's no love. There's no genuine love. They are existing in a family, trying to pretend to be in a family, but they are living like hostelites, eating together and maybe sleeping in different rooms or whatever. There's no joy. The simple reason, lack of love. And what is love? Love is God. God is love. So therefore, we'll only be able to follow the second commandment if we love one another. So now, in my next talk, I wish to explain this second commandment in much more detail, and we'll try to understand as to how love one another, or to love one another, becomes a very, very important part of our Christian spirituality. In fact, I would tell you, Christian holiness is love. Suppose somebody asks you, what is Christian holiness? And I tell people, Christian holiness is love. And what is love? Love is relationships. So therefore, Christian holiness becomes relationship. More of that in my next talk. But as of now, let's all ask ourselves, as we close this third talk, let us ask ourselves, have I given God the first priority in my life? Have I desired to love Him first? Is my heart filled with God's love? Let's pause for a while and ask God to fill His love, to pour down His love into our hearts, so that we may experience His love and thus share this love with one another. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.